This video we are going to be talking about colonial trade. That includes the Navigation Acts, mercantilism, the effects of the Navigation Acts, and then we're going to be talking about two different triangles of trade. So make sure you're taking notes. So the Navigation Acts are British trade laws that were enacted by British Parliament in the 17th century that regulated colonial economy and colonial trade. So the lumber, the iron, and the cotton, for example, that were grown throughout the 13 colonies were shipped back to England and they were made into furniture, tools, and textiles. So most products, like the ones I just mentioned, could only be sold to England. In return, England would take those resources that made the furniture, the tools, the textiles, and they would actually sell them back to the colonies. So the colonies sold the iron, the cotton to England. England turned those things into furniture, tools, textiles, things that people could actually use every single day, and then would sell them back to the colonies and throughout the entire world. And you can see where the little ships are throughout the map of Europe. Any product that was being shipped to the 13 colonies had to first stop in England where the products were taxed. So England was making a lot of money on taxing things that were being shipped to the 13 colonies. And you can see here how you have teas and spices that were being sent from Asia over into England to be taxed, and then finally it would reach the 13 colonies at a much higher price. Any of the ships that were being used for trade had to be built in either England or in the colonies, but the colonies would have to pay a tax on the ships that were being built, which leads us to the idea of mercantilism. Mercantilism is an economic system based on the idea that a nation, in this case Great Britain, can increase its wealth by importing raw materials and exporting finished goods. So you would have the import of raw materials like lumber, iron, and cotton, and they would export the finished goods, the furniture, the tools, the textiles, back to the colonies. So they were making wealth by bringing in these things that the country did not have, turning it into something useful, and then selling them back to the people that originally gave the raw material. Eventually what happens is Great Britain becomes incredibly wealthy, and people throughout England and throughout the world figure that they could get their goods a lot cheaper if they buy them directly from the Americans. So instead of buying lumber or buying furniture from England, Italy could now just buy it straight from Massachusetts, or iron from Pennsylvania, or cotton from Virginia. So they would avoid paying the British high prices that included that tax in there. The British were, of course, against it, which led to an increase of smuggling in the colonies because now they were trying to sell on the down low to other countries instead of going to England like they were supposed to. And then England started to enforce these Navigation Acts, and if you were caught violating these Navigation Acts and selling to someone besides England, you would get into serious trouble, usually really heavy fines. So since we're talking about trade, let's talk about the two different triangles of trade. This is the triangle of trade that's most commonly known and most commonly used. It's a 3-point pattern of trade between Great Britain, the 13 colonies, and West Africa. So from the American colonies, tobacco, rice, indigo, cotton would be shipped over to England. England would in turn ship guns and textiles to African nations, and in return for those items, the African nations would provide the English and other European countries with slaves that would be shipped to the 13 colonies and also to the Caribbean and South America. The second triangle trade is directly with Africa, the colonies, and the West Indies, or the Caribbean, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Haiti today. So the American colonies would ship over to Africa, directly to Africa, rum and iron. In return, the Africans would provide the one thing that they had, which was slaves, and that would be shipped to the Caribbean, and the Caribbean would provide the 13 colonies with sugar and molasses is just like a sugary syrup. over into the 13 colonies. So this was the second triangular trade that existed. And you guys can see here, here's an overlap of both of them together. The ones in red is the traditional triangular trade between the colonies, England and Africa. And then the one in blue is the second one that we just talked about between the colonies, the Caribbean and Africa. Based on your notes, you should be able to answer the following 5 questions. What are the 3 components of the Navigation Acts? Not only should you know those 3 components, but you should also know the basic definition of the Navigation Acts. You should know what mercantilism is, why there was an increase of smuggling to the colonies, the triangular trade between the colonies, England and Africa, and the triangular trade between the colonies, the Caribbean and Africa. If you guys are able to answer these questions, then you are set with your video. So now make sure that you answer your blog. If you are not, then rewatch the video to make sure that you understand each of these components. And if you don't understand something, write down questions or particular areas that are causing you issues that we could discuss tomorrow in class.